Hello YouTube, thank you for clicking on this video and shout out to Big Daddy Algorithm for pimping it out to you. My name is Megan and welcome to my channel. So as you'll notice, I have a little bit of a different setup going on here. I broke my ring light last week and had to order a new one. So I got one that has like one of those gooseneck things so that it will be easier for me to like film some overhead shots for my sewing project. I have a big thrift flip coming up that I want to do a video on. So I was going to get a goosenecked ring light anyway. So it was kind of convenient timing that my old one broke. So anyway, all this to say, I have a new setup here. So this is probably what you're going to be seeing from now on when I do these videos. Also, you'll notice that the lighting here sucks and I'm sorry about that once again. That's probably just going to be the reality from now on because I live in Canada and it's almost winter and it gets dark at like 5 o'clock now, and I work a full-time job and I am on the clock until 5 p.m. every day, which means I'm not going to get around to filming until after dark. So for the next like 4 to 5 months, this is what it's gonna look like. Sorry, that's just like the reality of it. I'm gonna try to like time my filming for the weekends when I can like set up in the afternoon before it gets dark, but like it's not always the reality because like I have a social life and I do stuff on weekends also. So all this to say, this is the best I can do. I'm sorry. So this is going to be another queer/asexual topic. And this is one that I've been going down a bit of a rabbit hole with for like the last year. So I'm super excited to talk about it with you guys today. I've been wanting to do this video for like a long time. I just felt like I hadn't had like enough research to do it yet. It is a topic that I do have some like personal experience with, which I'm going to touch on a little bit later in this video. And also like I have a lot of academic intellectual knowledge about it. So I feel like it's kind of one of those things that like intersects perfectly with like real life experience versus book learning. So I do feel like I have a lot to say on this topic. So my hope with this is that maybe you'll learn something new. Maybe it'll challenge some of your preconceived notions about what polyamory and like relationship anarchy and queer platonic partnerships are all about. Maybe you've never even heard of these terms before and this is like the first time that you're ever encountering them, in which case I hope that I can do the topics justice and I hope that I can prompt you to learn more if that's what you want to do. There is a lot to cover in this video, so I'm not going to be able to like really go in depth with it, unfortunately, just because like each of these topics really could be its own video all by itself because there's like so much to unpack. So this is going to be like a very basic like broad overview of what these three concepts are and how they're different and also how they intersect and the places where they intersect. And I'm also going to be talking about it through the lens of asexuality, which I feel like doesn't get examined enough because a lot of asexual and aromantic people are poly or they practice queer platonic partnerships and relationship anarchy. There is like a huge intersection between those communities, the same way there's like a big intersection between asexual and aspec people and the kink communities, which I covered in a previous video, so go check that out if you're interested in that topic. And also, before I forget, just want to remind you to like this video and subscribe to my channel because it lets me know that this is the kind of stuff that you want to see. My last two videos that dealt with like queer and asexual stuff got like a lot of positive feedback and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you. And it lets me know that like this is the kind of stuff that you guys are interested in. So now that I know that, I can keep doing videos about it. So it really does help me out when you give me feedback, even critical feedback. Like I welcome all types of feedback. So please do let me know in the comments if there's another topic along these lines that you would like me to cover, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because again, that lets me know that this is what you want to hear about. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about polyamory, relationship anarchy, and queer platonic partnership, and when and how these types of relationship models intersect, but also how they're different. Just to be clear, I'm not going to be pushing these lifestyles on you or arguing that they're better than traditional monogamous partnerships. Radical relationship structures aren't for everyone, and if you're not in a place where you can be super aware of your attachment style and actively doing the work to heal it if it's not secure, then these types of relationships probably aren't for you right now, and that's okay. I have an anxious, preoccupied attachment style that I'm working on healing, and right now I'm practicing romantic and sexual monogamy, and it's been great. Not about to knock that at all. This video is simply to give you an overview of these alternative relationship styles as a sort of special interest info dump, and also to explore them through an asexual lens, which I feel like doesn't really get talked about enough. There's a lot of sexual and romantic context to polyamory, which often can leave asexual and aromantic people feeling uncomfortable or left out, which was another reason I had a huge issue with polyamory at first. Even without the massive heartbreak, it still left me feeling vaguely uncomfortable, and I had no idea why until I realized that I'm ace. But things like relationship anarchy and queer platonic partnership leave room for a wider spectrum of feelings and can also encompass things like romantic friendships and platonic life partners. Polyamory. Polyamory is a huge topic that I can't possibly do justice to in this video, so maybe one day I will do a separate video just on that. But for now, though, I'll just give you the basics so that you can understand how it's different from relationship anarchy and queer platonic partnerships, although often these three things do go hand in hand. There are a lot of negative stereotypes about polyamory, and it's probably one of the most widely misunderstood aspects of the queer community, right up there with asexuality. Full disclosure, I completely bought into those negative stereotypes about polyamory, and I was really judgy about it for a while because I had tried it and gotten really hurt, which had left a bad taste in my mouth. But then a very close friend of mine told me that he was in a polyamorous relationship, which he still is happily in like 6 years later, which is awesome. And I started learning more about it because I wanted to be supportive and help advocate for him and his partners. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized that polyamory isn't the same thing as sleeping around or having an open relationship. Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with doing either of those things as long as you're honest and upfront about it, but polyamory is different. It's about having loving, committed relationships with multiple people. The key words here are loving and committed. It is not a band-aid solution for a failing monogamous relationship, nor is it an excuse to cheat, nor is it carte blanche to do whatever you want with whomever you want. If you're not in a place in your life where you're ready for a relationship, you are not ready for polyamory. If you see other people as competition, or if you hold any internalized misogyny and view women as sexual possessions or property in any way, you are not ready for polyamory. If you rely on your romantic partners for validation that you're desirable or lovable or worthy, then you are not ready for polyamory. If you have any kind of relationship or sexual trauma, or if you struggle with anxious or avoidant attachment styles and you're not actively working on those things, then you are not ready for polyamory. Ethical non-monogamy is the practice of engaging in multiple relationships, usually sexual and or romantic, with the informed consent of everyone involved. The key phrase here is informed consent. If you're doing polyamory correctly, then all of your partners should know about and consent to being in this dynamic. When you meet someone new and start developing feelings for them, you should be having ongoing discussions with your other partner or partners about it the entire time and working through any jealousy with them and solidifying trust with them before actively pursuing the new person. This obviously takes an outsized level of commitment, and if you're doing it correctly, then you have a responsibility to show up for your current partners and check in with them on an ongoing basis before diving headfirst into the new relationship. This obviously requires a radical level of trust, communication, and commitment, and each new relationship you engage in should enhance and strengthen the others. Polyamory is not and should never be used as a way to fix an existing monogamous relationship. Opening up a relationship should always be something that both partners authentically want for its own sake without any other underlying agenda. Ethical non-monogamy is predicated on the idea that no one person can or should be expected to fulfill all of your needs, and that love isn't exclusive or a finite resource. Many poly folks feel like they have an abundance of love to give, and it's not uncommon for them to feel restricted and miserable in monogamous relationships, although that's certainly not a requirement, and many poly folks can and do exist happily in monogamous relationships as well. There's some debate in the queer community about whether being poly is a choice or a legitimate orientation, but many people who practice ethical non-monogamy do feel like it's not a choice for them. They can easily fall in love with multiple people and love each of their partners equally with a deep appreciation for the uniqueness of each connection. That being said, many people also practice polyamory as a deliberate choice because it's what works best for them in their lives or makes the most sense to them, or simply because they want to, and all of those reasons are legitimate and valid. When everyone involved is emotionally healthy, mature, introspective, and good at communicating, polyamorous relationships are no less loving and committed than monogamous ones. In fact, they often require a lot more trust and love and commitment and responsibility than monogamous relationships do. Partners in exclusive monogamous relationships, especially heterosexual ones, aren't encouraged to communicate to the same level and depth as poly folks are, and mono cishet relationships often get worse over time because each partner can easily take the other one for granted. When you have relationships with many different people, your love and appreciation for each one can actually grow and deepen every time a new partner comes into the picture, because it really drives home how unique and special and irreplaceable your bond with each partner is. And I'm going to keep repeating this because I think it's a crucial part of understanding what polyamory actually is and what it looks like when it's being done well. There are many different types of polyamory and ways to practice it. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot more to unpack here, but I don't have time to get into it very deeply, so I'm going to just run through some of the more common ones really quickly. Hierarchical. This is where there's a hierarchy system that involves primary and secondary partners. Primary partners are people you're married to, live with, and/or have families with, and they take precedence over other partners in relationships. Non-hierarchical. In this type of structure, there's no ranking of partners, and each relationship is viewed equally. This is the type of polyamory that aligns most closely with relationship anarchy, which I'll get to later. And even if each relationship functions differently, they are all viewed as being equally important. Polyfidelity. Also a type of non-hierarchical polyamory in which all partners are viewed as being equally important, but the difference here is that all partners are exclusive to one another and are not seeking or open to new relationships. These types of dynamics can include thruples and quads, which is when 3 or 4 people are all sexually and/or romantically involved with one another. Solo poly. This is a loose definition that generally includes people who are single and identify as poly, but may live separately from their partners so they can prioritize themselves and their needs. Monopoly. This is a type of hybrid relationship where one partner is monogamous and the other is polyamorous. It's not uncommon to see this type of polyamory when one partner is aromantic or asexual, but the other partner is not. Like any other type of polyamory, trust and communication with the monogamous partner is absolutely essential for this kind of dynamic to be healthy and safe. V. This is where one partner has 2 separate partners who are not involved with each other. When you draw a diagram of this dynamic, it makes the letter V, hence the name. Polywebs or polycules. This describes a type of structure in which a group of people are connected through polyamorous lifestyles. They may or may not be romantically or sexually involved, but they may sometimes live together or share household responsibilities and raise children. This is really common in queer communities where it can be a type of chosen family, especially when the people practicing it are estranged from their biological families. All of these structures are valid and can be very healthy and safe for everyone involved, again, as long as there is love, trust, respect, open communication, and informed consent. Sometimes hierarchical polyamory can be challenging, especially if you're solo poly and in a relationship with someone who has a nested partner. It can also be difficult for the nested partner because having to consistently prioritize one relationship over another can come with a lot of guilt and frustration. And if you're the solo partner, feeling like you're not a priority can be very hurtful and damaging to your self-esteem, especially if you haven't done the work to address any trauma or codependent tendencies that you may have. Just as an example of when this might come into play, imagine you were in an open marriage and you had made dinner plans with one of your partners to celebrate an anniversary. Then, just as you're about to head out for date night, you find your spouse in tears at the kitchen table because they just lost their job. What do? Do you cancel on your other partner so you can comfort your spouse? Or do you comfort them, make sure they're okay, then trust them to handle their emotions and go on your date as planned? Either way, you're kind of the asshole, right? Situations like these are so often the reality of polyamory, and it's why it's not for everyone. I'm not knocking or invalidating hierarchical polyamory at all because it can be very healthy and affirming for people who do it ethically and safely. For example, if you're someone who needs a lot of space and tends to get wrapped up in your own life and hobbies and interests, it can be very safe and supportive to have a partner who has their own life and their own priorities and won't intrude on yours. Also, these types of dilemmas aren't exclusive to polyamory. Even in monogamous relationships, couples go through periods where one partner may prioritize other things in their life, like friends, hobbies, school, work, children, etc., leaving the other partner feeling left out and like they're not a priority. This is normal and highly solvable through honest and open communication, regardless of whether you're mono or poly. But hookup culture has ruined us, and people are extremely unwilling to allow for space and responsibility in their relationships, especially in monogamous relationships, because they come with so many more expectations of how your partner should and should not behave. I remember mid-2010s dating culture was drowning in that date someone who makes you a priority, not an option rhetoric, which I hated. I hated it then and I hate it now, and if I had had the information I needed to question those messages back then, I would have had much better relationships. So fuck you, Instagram dating memes. Because the thing is, people have lives, people have shit to do, people have hobbies and friends and jobs they care about, and if someone is willing to ignore or deprioritize those things just to make their partner happy, then I deeply question their viability as a relationship prospect. Like, yes, it's important to be responsible in your relationships and show up when you say you will and answer your text messages within a reasonable amount of time and not be shady, but you also shouldn't be throwing the rest of your life out the window just to prove to someone that they matter to you. Nor should you want to be with someone who would act like that. And as a recovering codependent people pleaser who did used to throw her whole life out the window whenever she got into a new relationship because that's what responsible committed partners do, I can say that with my full chest. It's not healthy. Don't do that. Don't date other people who do that. But I digress. Ideally, practicing polyamory isn't about having as much sex and variety in your dating life as possible. It's about being open to exploring the genuine connections that come your way and not having to limit yourself to the ownership structures that so often come with monogamy when it's just being unconsciously practiced. And it's about healing attachment styles, being introspective and self-aware, constantly working on and refining your communication skills, and about cultivating a genuine love and appreciation for the unique and irreplaceable connections that you have with each of your partners. Relationship anarchy. Okay, this is my favorite part. What is relationship anarchy and how is it different from polyamory? So relationship anarchy is basically the application of anarchist principles to our interpersonal relationships. It's about not prioritizing one type of relationship over another and viewing all of your relationships as having equal weight and importance regardless if they're romantic, platonic, or familial. In our culture, monogamous romantic partnerships are held up as being the most important relationships in our lives, and friendships, sibling relationships, and bonds with our parents, assuming they're healthy, are expected to take a back seat once you're in a socially legitimized romantic partnership. And then, once you have children, your relationship with your child is expected to take precedence over everything, to the detriment of all your other relationships, including your romantic one. Now, obviously, there are certain responsibilities and obligations when it comes to child rearing, and it does take over your life when your kids are little, and that is completely normal and fine. I am not questioning that at all. I'm not a parent. I don't know how that is. I'm sure it's very tough and hard to balance everything. Children can and should always come first when it comes to their well-being and safety. That is very important. However, many cultures around the world don't place such a huge emphasis on changing your entire life around to accommodate your child the way we do here in North America, and instead you just fold your child into your already existing life. But I digress. That could potentially be another topic for another day. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in learning more about North American parenting culture and practices, because that really is a fascinating topic, and my inner anthropologist is just delighted by all the ethnographic possibilities that come with looking at parenting culture in North America. Anyway, relationship anarchy is based on a foundation of deconstructing these hierarchies and on deeply questioning why romantic relationships and the nuclear family are given such weight and importance in our culture. Capitalism. While other important relationships, like those we have with our parents, our friends, our siblings, and our neighbors, are expected to take a back seat as soon as we're partnered up. Anarchy is founded in Marxist principles, and it rejects all hierarchy and hierarchical structures because they are fundamentally unethical and at odds with human health and well-being. The goal of relationship anarchy is to be aware of and dismantle any kind of coercion based on what romantic partners should do to prove that they love you, so that each partner can maximize their autonomy within the structure of the relationship. A lot of the time, this takes the form of polyamorous relationships, and this is where relationship anarchy can intersect with polyamory, but it doesn't have to. The principles of relationship anarchy can be applied to monogamous relationships too. For example, a monogamous couple where each partner is deeply in love with and committed to the other, but they choose not to live together or get married, is practicing relationship anarchy. Unlike polyamory, which is a relationship structure, relationship anarchy by definition has no structure. It's not a way to organize or categorize your relationships. It's a philosophy and a mindset that you can adopt regardless of whether you're single, partnered, monogamous, or poly. It's more of an attitude and an approach, and it can apply to friendships and platonic relationships as well as romantic and sexual ones. There are 9 core tenets of relationship anarchy, and really I could do a whole video just on this, and maybe someday I will, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to go through them really quickly. Number 1, love is abundant and every relationship is unique. Relationship anarchy questions the idea that love is only real if a couple is actively pursuing all the expected relationship milestones like cohabitation and marriage, and it recognizes that we all have the capacity to love more than one person with a deep appreciation for the unique connection that we have with each one. That's also very similar to polyamory, but again, it's not the same thing. Love and respect instead of entitlement. This is about not letting your feelings for a person or your history together make you feel entitled to their time or their compliance with what's considered normal in a relationship. For example, someone practicing relationship anarchy would not badger and pester their partner for an engagement ring or a baby after they'd already expressed a reluctance to do those things. Instead, they would turn their questioning inwards and ask themselves what marriage and children really mean and symbolize for them, what their values and boundaries are around these topics, and whether the love they feel for their partner is more or less important than their desire to have these things. Full disclosure, I haven't always been stellar at this, and from time to time I have and still do find myself succumbing to internalized cultural norms about marriage and cohabitation. I sometimes feel like my partner and I should be doing certain things, and then when I notice those thoughts come up, I immediately stop and ask myself where they're coming from. Am I really frustrated that we're not doing any of the relationship escalator things, or am I frustrated by the fact that my culture and the people around me don't view my relationship as being important or serious because we don't have children or live together or want to legally bind ourselves to one another? It's always that last one, and sometimes I feel like it would be so much easier to just do the things that are expected of us as a couple and get that validation and reassurance from family and society that I'm a real adult in a real adult relationship. Even though the reality is, in spite of not doing those things, or maybe because we're not doing those things, my partner and I have a good, solid, healthy relationship that really works for us, and to succumb to social pressure would go against my values and boundaries because I have done that before and it did not work for me. But I'll get to that later, and this is where the third tenet comes in. Number 3, find your core set of relationship values. This is about figuring out for yourself what you really need and desire in your relationships, independent of what society expects of you, and then upholding those standards and boundaries no matter what, without making special rules and exceptions to prove to someone that you love them. If you don't want to get married, then you don't want to get married, and giving into pressure from your partner or from family and society isn't proving how real your love is. It's just other people pressuring you to do something that's out of line with who you are, and that's not cool of them, and you shouldn't do it. Number 4, heterosexism is rampant and out there, but don't let fear lead you. When you practice relationship anarchy, you have to be strong enough to stand your ground. The social, legal, and cultural system that dictates what real love looks like is very real, and it's everywhere. If you choose to live this way, people will question the validity of your relationships and see them as not being real because you're not following what society says commitment should look like. They'll question your ethics and project some really negative stereotypes onto you. Fuck that noise. You don't need a ring, a piece of paper, a shared living space, or a baby to prove how real your love is. You know it, your partners know it, no one else has to. Build for the lovely unexpected. I love this one. This is about being free to express yourself without the burden of shoulds. It's about being open to exploring the connections that come your way and organizing them based on a genuine desire to spend time together and explore each other rather than on a sense of duty. Number 6, fake it till you make it. Relationship anarchy isn't easy. Not only are you fighting to swim upstream against the onslaught of heteronormativity and compet, you're also having to constantly get curious about and examine your own reactions and emotions to things. Jealousy, disappointment, and unmet expectations are normal human experiences, and relationship anarchy isn't about not experiencing those things. It's about looking inwards and questioning where those reactions and emotions are coming from, not letting them dictate your actions, and being brave enough to communicate openly and honestly with your partners whenever they violate one of your boundaries or cross a line for you, so that resentment isn't allowed to flourish. This is hard to do, and a lot of people practice normative monogamy as a way to avoid having to do that work. But every person you have any kind of relationship with is going to disappoint you at some point. You're going to feel jealous and anxious and rejected and let down and uncomfortable from time to time in any romantic relationship, and monogamy isn't a guarantee against those things. You cannot be codependent when you're practicing relationship anarchy, but sometimes we just are because that's human and that's okay. In that case, you just fake it till you make it. When you're feeling strong and inspired, think about how you would like to see yourself act during times when you're feeling overwhelmed. Use that as a guideline when times are rough, and seek support from others who are also practicing relationship anarchy. Number 7, trust is better. Assume that your partner wants the best for you and don't tie their actions to their feelings. Sometimes people are just dealing with a lot and they don't have the energy to show up for their partners, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they don't love you. Communicate openly and honestly about those things and how they make you feel and what you need from your partners, and create a relationship where it's okay to withdraw, both for your partner and for yourself. Give people space to talk, explain, see you, and be responsible in the relationship. Number 8, change through communication. Conversation and communication should be the foundation of every relationship, but they're especially important in radical ones. When you practice relationship anarchy, you don't have to read between the lines of what someone's saying. It's okay and even encouraged to ask what they mean, what they want, and how they really feel. Communicate about everything, even when it feels awkward to do so, especially when it feels awkward to do so. Communicate about talking, about texting styles, about how often and what kinds of checking in you prefer. Let your partners know what it means when you do certain things and how you like to communicate and what love and commitment mean to you. Never assume anything, and if you notice yourself telling stories in your head about your partner's behavior and communication styles, then it's time to have a conversation with them about it. Relationship anarchy requires a level of direct and straightforward communication that's just straight up uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it's necessary in this type of dynamic. Number 9, customize your commitments. Relationship anarchy isn't about avoiding commitment, it's about customizing that commitment and freeing yourself and others from norms that dictate certain things in order for love to be considered real and valid. It's okay to start from scratch, be explicit, and build the types of commitment that you genuinely want and that work for you. The beauty of relationship anarchy is that it allows for all types of relationships and gives equal importance and weight to all of them. You can have romantic relationships, friends with benefits, romantic friendships, queer platonic partnerships, you name it, and all are treated just as seriously as you would treat a spouse or a live-in partner. Relationship anarchy is similar to polyamory, but it's not the same thing. Polyamory has a sexual and romantic undertone, whereas relationship anarchy doesn't have to. Relationship anarchy is more inclusive of asexual and aromantic people because one of the tenets is to customize your connections. With relationship anarchy, there is never ever the expectation of sex or romantic intimacy, and it's never assumed that a relationship is headed in that direction until and unless it's openly discussed. Some poly folks do practice it and apply anarchist principles to their relationships, but it's not exclusive to polyamory, and as I said earlier, it can be applied to monogamous relationships as well. If someone tells you they practice relationship anarchy, it doesn't automatically mean that they're poly, and you should never assume that that's the case. As with anything, all the time, ask, communicate, be open. It's also different from polyamory because, as I mentioned earlier, some types of poly relationships have hierarchy built into them, whereas relationship anarchy fundamentally rejects and seeks to dismantle hierarchy. That's like the entire point of it. Hierarchy. Hierarchy is woven into the fabric of our society because our society is a late-stage capitalist hellscape. It's everywhere, and when it comes to marriage and partnership, it's rarely questioned. In Canada, where I live, married partners are entitled to tax benefits like the spousal tax credit, which allows married couples to transfer or combine tax credits to optimize their returns, contribute to one another's RRSPs, split up to 50% of their pension income, which reduces their taxes when one spouse has a higher income than the other, and transfer marital assets without triggering gains. Common law partners who have been living together for a year or more are also entitled to the same legal and financial benefits and protections as married couples, depending on the province they live in. When evaluating whether a couple counts as common law, the courts in Canada look at the following: shelter, sexual and personal behavior, services, social, societal, economic support, and children. Polyamorous people, aspec people, and couples who are committed but not cohabitating are automatically left out of these protections. In Canada, right now, partners who have only known each other for 14 months but live together and have a baby are entitled to more financial and legal protections than a couple who's been together for 14 years yet has never married, moved in together, or had children. Our entire legal and financial system is built on a hierarchy that privileges married couples with children, where they exist at the top, followed by cohabitating couples with children, then married couples without children, then cohabitating couples without children, and then everyone else is considered legally single, even if they've had a committed partner or partners for years. And it's not just the legal and financial framework either. These kinds of hierarchies trickle down into our culture and society as well. Getting married, having children, and setting up a household are glorified as markers of adulthood, yet they say nothing of the internal, emotional, and intellectual capabilities of the people who achieve these milestones. We all know people who have children and are still children themselves, and we all know people who got married way too young before they were like emotionally adults yet, even though they had all of those outward social markers of adulthood. The concept of adulthood is still tied to our social and marital status rather than the internal work we've done to learn lessons, manage our emotions in a healthy way, address our traumas, and work on our attachment issues, communicate better, deconstruct harmful messages, and self-actualize. That is all really, really important work that contributes to emotional and intellectual maturity, but it's all internal work. It is not externally seen, and it is not externally validated in the same way that marriage and commitment are. The relationship escalator. A lot of the social and cultural messages we receive about love and relationships go something like this. Boy meets girl, boy pursues girl, girl eventually gives in, boy and girl fall in love, meet each other's families, move in together, get married, buy a house, and raise children. Done. Their love is real. It's valid. Everyone can see it.
I met my soulmate when I was 15 years old, and I have loved her every minute of every day since I first bought her that mint chocolate chip cone.
Just to be clear, I'm not knocking this at all. If it's something that you truly desire and it feels authentic to you, then power to you. That is fantastic. I am, however, questioning the ubiquitousness of those messages because they leave out a lot of people, especially queer, neurodivergent, and differently abled people. BIPOC individuals also have their own unique challenges and struggles with this messaging because it's inherently capitalist, colonialist, and predicated on the concept of ownership. Those incremental steps towards marriage and ultimately child rearing are referred to as the relationship escalator, and when you meet someone and fall in love with them, it's expected that you'll just ride it all the way to the top. Dating in monogamous heterosexual culture is so often treated like an interview process for the job of spouse and provider or womb, and completely bypasses the idea of dating as a way to just meet new people and explore genuine connections on your own terms at a pace that feels right to you. So when I was casually dating around in my late 20s to try and figure out what my boundaries and needs around sex and intimacy were as like an asexual person, I would often meet straight men who were very obviously looking for like a girlfriend, capital A, capital G. And it was almost like they didn't even care who the girlfriend was as long as she was clean, met his standards for attractiveness, presented herself well, and had a vagina. And as soon as I would catch even the slightest hint of I need a girlfriend and you'll do, I would flee in the other direction so fast because it was glaringly obvious that they didn't actually care about me and my fullness as a human being. They just cared about having someone to fulfill a social role for them and be available for sex. And that was like an instant turn off for me. But that's what the monogamous heterosexual relationship escalator is so often about. Not always, not every time, but very often. It's about reaching the next level and being validated by society for that, rather than just enjoying the ride or truly getting to know and appreciate the person that you're on the escalator with. If a romantic relationship isn't progressing up the relationship escalator, society doesn't view it as legitimate, and people who reject the escalator altogether are often looked down on and pitied because they're assumed to be lonely, despite how deep and meaningful and fulfilling and healthy their unofficial relationships might actually be. Love doesn't always have to end in marriage, and marriage doesn't automatically mean that love is real or even romantic. Queer platonic partnerships. This is another one of my favorite topics and one of those things that I've just been down a rabbit hole about for like the last year and a bit. Queer platonic partnerships are committed relationships between partners where there's no romantic or sexual attraction, yet the bond between them is still just as strong as if there was. Queer platonic relationships and feelings are common in the aro-ace community, and they're a creative way for aspec people to build deep and meaningful relationships without the expectation of romantic and or sexual encounters. They're a type of relationship anarchy in the sense that they break norms about what real love looks like, and they may or may not involve traditional commitments like marriage, cohabitation, and children. Some queer platonic partners may have sex from time to time or do things like kiss and cuddle and hold hands, but those things are certainly not expected or even the norm in the same way as they are in romantic relationships. Queer platonic partnerships, however, are getting more visible, which is awesome. And actually, it was either last year or like maybe the year before, ABC News in the States did a really cool little like documentary on queer platonic partners. And they interviewed a bunch of people who were practicing these types of relationships. And most of them identified as asexual. And they talked about their different experiences of dating like outside of their queer platonic partnership.
Demisexual is when you require an emotional intimacy to feel sexual attraction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also why a platonic life partnership works for us, because on a daily basis, we don't crave physical intimacy.
If you guys were to get romantically involved with another partner, right, with somebody else, or is it something that, hey, you guys would have to have a conversation and reevaluate where you stand?
I'm dating someone right now, and I'm crazy about him. However, I don't plan on making him my life partner, even in the future. I don't see myself moving in with him. I don't see myself sharing a bank account with him. And I think that that's to the benefit of my romantic relationship, because now all pressure is off.
And it was really, really fascinating. And I'm going to link to it below if you want to watch the whole thing. But it gives a really good idea of what like queer platonic partnerships could look like in our society and how they could benefit the people who are practicing that type of relationship structure. These types of partnerships are often, though not always, non-monogamous, and queer platonic partners may have other relationships that are sexual and romantic. This is where they both intersect with and yet are different from polyamory. Unlike polyamorous relationships, queer platonic partnerships aren't based on romantic or sexual connections, though they often leave room for each partner to have those experiences with others. They can also be a type of relationship anarchy, although they don't have to be. You can be in a queer platonic relationship without actively practicing the tenets of relationship anarchy. Though they seem new and radical, queer platonic relationships have actually been around for a while. Historically called the Boston marriage, it wasn't uncommon for wealthy upper-class women in New England in the late 19th and early 20th centuries to cohabitate and set up a household together. Coverture laws at the turn of the last century treated a husband and wife as one person, and a woman was legally required to surrender individual ownership of any and all assets and property, including her body, to her husband when she got married. To avoid this, many wealthy women formed long-term loving partnerships with each other where they would share a home and a life, both for companionship and to avoid traditional marriage that would render them the property of a man. Though, thankfully, coverture laws no longer exist here, queer platonic partnerships are still based on a desire to establish long-term companionship and commitment that isn't based on sexual or romantic love. They're more common with aromantic people than with asexual people, but they do exist in both spaces. Though they're not usually romantic in nature, hence the platonic and queer platonic, they're queer in the sense that they break existing norms and expectations around romantic love as being the basis for marriage and cohabitation. They're also not strictly the domain of queer people either. Two straight women who buy a house together as friends but actively date men are technically in a queer platonic relationship. The cast of the Golden Girls were actually a queer platonic polyweb, so you can be straight and still be in a queer platonic relationship. Queer platonic feelings exist somewhere between platonic and romantic feelings, but they don't quite neatly fit into either box. Aro-ace people call these feelings squishes or meshes, which I love. I love the term squish because it's similar to having a crush, but often without the sexual component. This is how I've always experienced having a crush, as like a really strong attraction to someone on a romantic and sensual level, but usually without any sexual feelings or desires, although I do experience that sometimes. I always know when my attraction to someone is beyond platonic when I find myself thinking about them all the time, wanting to spend a lot of my time with them and wanting to like kiss and touch them in non-sexual ways. My experiences with polyamory. So I'm going to get a little bit personal here because polyamory is so stigmatized. And I think it's really helpful for people who have experience with this type of relationship structure to talk about that experience and be really honest about what worked for them and what didn't, because that actually helps to counter a lot of those negative stereotypes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with polyamory and also like what I would like to see in my life going forward. And if any of this resonates with you, please drop me a comment below. Because again, it would be great to hear the stories of other polyamorous people and hear your experiences if you also have tried it. I don't have a ton of experience with polyamory, but I'll just be real and admit that the experiences I have had weren't very healthy. I've tried it a couple of times with a couple of different people, both times in hierarchical arrangements. The first time I tried it, I was the primary partner, and the second time I was the secondary partner, and my partner had a nested partner. Neither of those arrangements worked very well for me, and after my last failed poly relationship, I was very unwilling to engage with it again. But then after unpacking these experiences, I realized that the reason I hadn't had a good time with polyamory is because I hated the hierarchical nature of both the situations I had been in, and on top of that, neither the people I dated nor I had been very good at communicating, and not communicating well is going to be the death knell of like any relationship, regardless of whether it's poly, monogamous, familial, or platonic. On top of that, my partners and I had entered into those situations for the wrong reasons without really understanding the reasons behind what we were doing, which very quickly blew up in everyone's faces. Lesson learned. After a lot of introspection, I realized that the lack of consistency, commitment, responsible follow-through, and honest and open communication had bothered me much more than the fact that my partners had other partners. And I've dealt with the exact same issues in a lot of my monogamous relationships too. This is not something that's unique to polyamory by any means. Right now, I wouldn't say that I'm poly in the sense that it feels like an orientation or something that I need to do. As I mentioned earlier, there are many people out there for whom polyamory doesn't feel like a choice and they feel trapped and unhappy in monogamous relationships, and that's completely valid and something I strongly believe should be more normalized and widely talked about. But personally, I feel perfectly happy and free and like I'm able to be myself in monogamous relationships as long as they're healthy, and I would feel the same way in a poly relationship as well, again, as long as it's healthy and not hierarchical. Queer platonic partnership is absolutely my ideal relationship structure, though. I have very firm boundaries around my romantic relationships because I love and value them so much, and I would never, ever, ever live with, marry, or have children with my romantic and sexual partners. I mean, I would never have children with anybody, full stop, because I don't want them. I'd feel guilty like all the time for forcing another human being to be alive in this world the way it looks like it's going, and my lifestyle is not very child-friendly, and I am deeply unwilling to change that, but I digress. When you live with and or marry someone with whom you have a romantic and sexual relationship, within a very short amount of time, that relationship begins to change. It goes from being romantic and sexual to being more of a domestic partnership, and hopefully, if your relationship was built on a solid foundation of friendship, then you can navigate this shift together and you will still be left with a lot of love, respect, and appreciation, even when the fire goes out. And this is how most marriages in our society go, and that's completely valid. And I do acknowledge that there's something very beautiful and profound about navigating a relationship that changes in this way with one person for the rest of your lives. However, this is not for me. I value romantic love too much to ever be happy in that kind of a situation. My partner and I have been together for years, but we don't live together, we're not married, and we have no intention of doing either of those things. We've had tons of conversations about this, and we believe that our relationship works so well because we don't live together. And even though we've long since settled into the comfortable routine stage of a relationship, and he knows me better than like anyone else alive, that initial spark has never died. We still appreciate one another as much as we did in the beginning, and that fire for us has never gone out, and I really, really value that. When I was married, after the romantic part of our relationship was over, it really bothered me that I was never going to have that again for the rest of my life. That my romantic life was just over, that's it, just like that, and I would never again get to be in love. I know that sounds like a cold feet before the wedding trope, and those kinds of sentiments are shown in movies and on TV shows. It's almost always poked fun at, and the person expressing them is portrayed as being just like an immature commitment phobe.
But if you're calling after Saturday, you reached Mr. and Mrs. Bing. Please leave a message for the Bings.
But those are actually very real and very valid feelings. And when I was married, my mental health and emotional well-being took a massive nosedive in part because of them. My marriage was also unhealthy for other reasons, but in all the introspection and work that I've done to sort through it in the years since our separation, I've been able to separate my feelings of being stuck and suffocated from other aspects of our marriage that were unhealthy. I would have felt that way even in the most loving and healthy relationship. In the months after I got married, I experienced this profound sense of loss as I struggled to process the fact that my romantic life was just over, and that feeling of grief around it never went away. A lot of people go through phases like that just before or after marriage, and that's normal, and after a while it usually goes away as you settle into your new life. But for me, it never went away. It wasn't just a phase, it was a fundamental misalignment of my circumstances and my values. When I finally unpacked that years later, I realized that it was because when I was married, I'd had to give up something that I fundamentally value and cherish and desire, and it felt like I was having to compromise this huge part of who I am. I can't be happy with a monogamous domestic partnership because I feel an immense and all-consuming sense of loss when that romantic relationship is subsumed by all the minutiae of everyday life and then is forever transformed by it. To me, a romantic relationship is a place where my partner and I can go to escape from the realities of day-to-day life and create our own little bubble of love and safety and intimacy and sensuality and sex and inside jokes and shared experiences. To bring those things into contact with the harsh realities of keeping a household running feels to me like violating a sacred space, like hanging laundry up to dry on a temple shrine. That being said, I also love the idea of co-creating that day-to-day life with someone, of offering real concrete support and love and friendship and sharing the burdens of life with one another. That also feels just as important and just as sacred as a romantic relationship, but in a different way for different reasons. So my ideal relationship structure would be to have a nested queer platonic partner who would live with me so the two of us could create a life together, maybe get married if it made legal and financial sense to do so, set up a household, and cultivate a very deep and enduring love, commitment, and friendship between us. And then both of us would also be free to have other romantic and sexual partners as well. This is a type of relationship anarchy in the sense that my partners and their partners would all be choosing relationships that fulfill certain needs and desires that no one person can or should be expected to fulfill. This kind of queer platonic polyamory feels easy and natural and intuitive to me because I'm asexual and I don't experience sexual attraction for the most part. It is possible for me to have deeply connected, intimate, and loving relationships without sex or romantic love, and to live side by side with a partner every day and not fall in love or want to have sex with them. So this has been another long one, and I hope I've given you something new to think about, or at least prompted you to expand your view of what single versus partnered might actually look like. Not all partnered people are married, and not all married people are partnered. Statistically, women in heterosexual marriages are less happy than their unmarried peers because we still bear the burden of the mental, emotional, and domestic labor when we cohabitate with straight men. And that, again, could be another whole video topic all on its own. So comment below if you want me to do a video on domestic labor and the mental load, because boy, do I have a lot to say about that. Many women in heterosexual relationships report that they feel alone in their marriages because a lot of men haven't been socialized to be good domestic partners. They might be good lovers or good romantic partners, but that's different from being a good domestic partner, and it requires a different set of emotional and physical skills, which a lot of people still don't teach to their sons because patriarchy. Being a good romantic partner doesn't automatically mean you'll be a good domestic partner, and having a solid, healthy romantic relationship with someone doesn't mean you'll also be able to have a solid, healthy domestic partnership with them. A lot of cohabitating relationships fail during the transition from one to the other because society tells us to pick our domestic partners on the basis of romantic love rather than on an assessment of whether we'd be compatible as roommates and friends. Because at the end of the day, that's what our live-in romantic relationships turn into, friends and roommates. Aside from it being extremely difficult for women who experience a lack of support from their male partners, and trust me, I know how hard it is to be married without being partnered, it also challenges assumptions about where the relationship escalator actually lands us in the end. Does it really result in happiness and wedded domestic bliss? For some couples, absolutely it does, and that is truly a beautiful and wonderful thing. But for many people, it doesn't, especially for queer and neurodivergent people whose needs and desires often don't align with what's considered normal. All I'm asking for is that we check our assumptions about what it means to be partnered and question why we feel the need to create social and legal framework in an attempt to categorize and legitimize something as wild, unpredictable, unexpected, and wonderfully disruptive as love. For those of you who watched all the way through to the end, I super appreciate you, and thank you as always for your support. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to thumbs up and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it lets me know that you're interested in this kind of stuff so that I can keep making content for you. So that about does it, my loves. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Toodaloo.